Story 1. Classic horror stories often begin with an act of foolish pride. When your main character receives a clear warning and believes themselves to be too smart, too strong, and too lucky to ever come face to face against evil, let alone lose against it. This, however, is not one of those stories. For starters, we are not talking about a fictional character. We are talking about a man as real, honest, vulnerable, and worthy as any of us. A man with a past, with friends, family, and acquaintances. A simple man with plans for the weekend, chores at home, and goals in life like any other person. We are talking about a protagonist that didn't even have the kindness of receiving a warning before he fell down the rabbit hole of a horror story he didn't even know was in full swing all around him. No. This man had never heard of the legend of Skinwalkers. How could he have known when he stumbled upon one of these monsters' paths? The person that lived this story in the flesh was a humble police officer that naively settled in a town in Colorado, closer to forests than desert regions. One fateful day, the police officer, as he shall be addressed, attended an emergency call near the woods. This was part of the job, and no part of him could have suspected anything worse than what he usually had to deal with was going on. When he arrived at the scene of the crime and the forces spotted the victim's body, the police officer shivered, felt nauseous, and felt his skin crawl at the disgusting violence in front of him. Still, part of the job. Probably the worst case he had witnessed so closely, but he hadn't yet imagined his own life could be at risk. He was a trained officer with a gun. He didn't fear a madman with a rusty knife hiding in the woods. He wouldn't have waited too long to figure out just how wrong he was. He should have been scared. He should have been terrified. And anybody close to the scene of the crime should have been running for their lives as fast as they could. The police officer arrived at the scene of the crime and quickly gathered as much information as he could. Apparently, a couple had been hiking on a trail nearby and caught an awfully rotten smell. Their dog led them directly to the source and then ran away as fast as he could. The couple called 911 immediately, and by the time the police had arrived, they were still shocked and sick to their stomachs. No one on the police force present at the scene of the crime could have imagined what they were about to face. The police officer wasn't yet scared. He approached the scene carefully, calmly, even when he caught that disgusting smell. It was the worst scent he had ever smelt. It was rotten. It was nauseating. And still, not even that prepared him for the full reality. He gasped, then gagged when he saw the body. His colleagues were standing all around it, unsure of how to proceed. Nobody in this area had ever seen anything like it. It was a woman's body, and it was missing all the skin. This woman had been skinned in the most brutal way. It was the worst nightmare you could possibly imagine. The team was frantic, nervous, and tension shot through the roof every minute they spent close to the body. The police officer didn't envy the members of the team that would have to analyze the body, but that wasn't his task. Instead, he was quickly alerted of what he had to do. There were footprints nearby, and they were fresh. He wasn't there to deal with the body. He was there to help catch the abominable criminal that could have done this to another person. The police officer left his team behind and started following the trail. He kept his hand on his gun and his senses on alert, and his radio on as he listened to the information on the study of the body. He entered the woods carefully and determined, but everything started to change too quickly for him to keep up. All at once, he lost sight of the footprints' tracks on the ground. This sudden disappearance confused him. He looked around him and realized he was far from his team. But something stole his attention quickly. It was the sound of a baby crying. He could hardly believe his ears, but the sound was unmistakable. Who would be carrying a crying baby in this corner of the woods with a gruesome murder so close. The police officer forgot about the footprints and started following the sound of the crying baby, but he was distracted by extremely concerning news coming from the radio. Yes, the body was missing all the skin, but there was more horrifying news. Apparently, there were bite marks on the body from several different animals. Sure, maybe some of those could be a curious beast that inspected the dead body. That wasn't all. They would have to run more tests, but everyone on site so far had agreed one of the bite marks on the disfigured body looked decidedly human. The police officer was so disturbed he barely realized the baby had stopped crying. When he refocused on the task in hand, he stopped walking. He stood still in the middle of the forest, assessing the situation, convincing himself that it wasn't lost, that the rapidly setting sun and growing shadows all around him weren't scaring him at all. But then, everything took an even more sinister turn. He was standing right there, still, quiet, vulnerable, with goosebumps on his skin. And that's when he saw it. There was movement out of the corner of his eye, and the police officer turned around quickly. It was just a blur, just a shadow moving extremely fast through the depths of the forest. But he could have sworn he saw a naked woman running through the woods. He immediately pulled out his gun. The only reason his hand didn't shake was years of training. But it was all about to get thrown out the window when he heard the next words coming through his radio. Apparently, they found traces of the victim. Teeth scattered in the area. Strands of hair wrapped around shards of glass and similar objects tucked against the trees. Witchcraft. Witchcraft, that's what someone kept saying on the radio. But the police officer didn't believe in that. But there was suddenly a pair of glowing yellow eyes staring at him from somewhere in the shadows. Bright, yellow, feral, unblinking. The police officer felt all his blood run cold. He looked away as quickly as possible, but he still started shaking from head to toe. He closed his eyes tightly. He took deep breaths. He ignored the smell of rotten flesh in the air and the sound of an animal growling in the distance behind him. He put all his focus on the radio and the sounds of people begging to come back, the superstitious locals telling him to just leave it alone, just return, save his own life instead of others for once. At the end of the day, the police officer didn't find out what exactly was hiding in the forest that night. But he kept his life, something that many people told him he should thank his lucky stars for. Not everybody gets to walk away unharmed from an encounter with a Skinwalker. Story 2. As a species, humans can be very territorial. We all love to have a place in the world that is just ours. We are all very protective of our homes, and we would do anything to fight any threats that come against them. However, some people tend to forget their homes weren't always theirs. Some people don't think about the lines getting blurred, the frontiers losing meaning, and threats considering you an equal threat. This is a story above everything else about a family. This family had a home, this family loved each other, and when it was time to face a life or death situation, it was only that powerful love that got them out of the hell that had taken over their beloved home. Everything happened on a small but comfortable farm in New Mexico, where a family of 4 lived thinking they were safe and free inside the fence that went all around their property, separating them from the other farms, from the wild woods outside, and from any danger the world could throw at them. They were about to be proved severely wrong. It all started when a few chickens started to appear dead one morning. At first, most of the family didn't worry. Chickens died all the time for all kinds of reasons. It was something that could be dealt with. What most of the family didn't know was that the man of the house, which we will call the farmer, had noticed something out of the ordinary about these deaths. It wasn't just a few chickens showing up dead out of nowhere. No. He hid this from his family, but he found the chickens completely massacred. Their fragile bodies had been destroyed in ways that he hadn't seen another animal do in all his life. He found just gross piles of flesh, organs and blood, with feathers scattered around, as if someone had ripped the chickens apart, spilled out the insides, and taken whatever they could from the outside. It was maddening, it was strange, and it was driving him mad. Because the farmer thought that this was unusual behavior for any of the unusual animals that preyed on the chickens, he started to fear he was dealing with some kind of robbers, bandits, or even annoying teenagers from neighboring farms. He would give them a lesson. He would call the police, and he swore he would catch them. But first he needed to get a real good look at them just to be sure. So, one night, he camped outside his house, waiting in the dark, in the shadows, in the cold. And all his theories went out the window when he finally saw it. It wasn't a person at all. It was a coyote. It was the strangest coyote he had ever seen. The animal had entirely white fur, if it could barely even be called white. It looked dirty, corrupted, and stained. Unfortunately, it ran away before the farm was close enough to shoot, but he would try again the next night. He would kill that coyote, he was certain of it. The next night, the farmer repeated his actions. He waited outside of his house under the cover of darkness, and this time, he had his shotgun ready. As soon as he caught sight of the coyote, he stood up slowly, with practiced precision. He was a hunter at heart, trained by his own father, raised to protect his family. He aimed the gun, took a steadying breath, and shot the animal right in the head. He sprinted to the place where the little beast fell, convinced that his problems were over, except for the fact that the animal was now nowhere to be found. It was impossible. He was sure he hit the coyote in the head. Tired and ready to get back to bed, the farmer convinced himself that maybe he hit the animal's neck or something, and it lived enough to go back and hide in the woods and die. Still, he was sure no animal could survive another night wounded like that. 2 days later, the farmer woke up to find about half of his chickens dead. It was a real massacre. It was shocking and upsetting, and his family started to feel unsafe in their own home. He couldn't tolerate this. He swore he would kill that coyote even if it would be the last thing he ever did in his life. However, that night, before he left to go on his hunt, his wife revealed terrible news to him. The reason why she was so scared was much bigger than the coyote. She had found, while digging around in their garden, a buried piece of something like a vase, and it was wrapped around with a strand of black hair. The farmer was the only one with dark hair in a family of blondes. He insisted it must have been there for years. It didn't mean anything, and he didn't want to hear her theories and superstitions. He had a job to do. However, around midnight, when the farmer realized that it was an unusually dark and cold night, he couldn't erase the image from his mind. What kind of creature was killing his chickens? And how had a piece of his own hair ended up being buried among the vegetables? This didn't make any sense. He had to kill this animal if he wanted to find some peace of mind. Fortunately, he didn't have to wait too long. One night, he heard a suspicious rustle of leaves, quick footsteps, and something stepping on a fallen branch. The farmer got up swiftly, prepared his gun, and started walking with as much stealth and determination as he could muster. He was incredibly careful and still. When he saw what was waiting for him, he couldn't avoid the gasp that escaped his throat. Some distance ahead of him, it wasn't the same white coyote. It wasn't a coyote at all. The thing must have heard the farmer's gasp, because it started running away. The farmer, despite his shock, chased after the monster that had been eating his chickens, feeling less and less confident with each passing minute. The more he ran, the more he could see what he was chasing, and he did not like what he was seeing. It was too large to be a coyote, and it moved strangely, uncoordinated and unnatural. Finally, it clicked. It wasn't a live coyote. It was the skin of a regular coyote hanging from the back of an unknown kind of beast. It was big, fast. It ran on 4 legs, and when it stopped abruptly at the edge of the woods, so did the farmer. He had never been so scared in his life. He closed his eyes, not ready to see what kind of creature from hell was waiting for him. He didn't even suspect the truth. He did the only thing he could think of. He aimed his gun blindly ahead of him, and he fired. The farmer was utterly confused by hearing the sound of something like a crow cry out, but he didn't wait to find out. The farmer turned around and started running as fast as he could. He stumbled through his own farm. He dropped his gun halfway through. He could barely breathe through the fear of forming a lump in his throat, and he barely made it home in time. The next day, after finding all his chickens dead, the farmer took his family and went away to stay with some relatives while he took care of selling his property. He was never able to make sense of what he lived through that night, but he got as far away from it as possible, and just in time to save himself and his family. Story 3. More often than not, people end up being part of a tragedy for entirely unfair reasons. Nobody would walk willingly into a devilish trap that would put them and their loved ones at risk. That's how some of the worst stories come to life, by simple and awful mistakes, by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, hearing "it was not your fault" rarely helps the victims. Fortunately, every now and then someone will escape their tragic ending at just the last minute, and they'll live to tell the tale, even if nobody will believe them, even if their stories get lost, mocked, twisted apart, or completely ignored. In this case, a story that seemed unbelievable, that was disregarded and discarded by authorities and skeptics, finally sees the light of day, or the intimidating protagonism of the moonlight of yet another story about people that barely survived an encounter with what we can only call Skinwalkers. In sinking ships during times of catastrophe, we've all heard the phrase "women and children first" as a sign to save and protect the most vulnerable people before those supposedly less vulnerable. However, what happens when women and children are the only people present when tragedy strikes? What does it look like when they are the only ones there to witness the moment that unimaginable horrors step out of the darkness into our world? In this story, a simple woman, a mother, ventured into her hiking trail accompanied by her children, a little boy and a little girl, 7 and 10 years old respectively. This wasn't an uncommon occurrence for the family. Every red flag and bad sign was easily ignored as something common, explainable, not worthy of worry. First, they usually explored the trail accompanied by other people, family or friends. This time they were completely alone. Second, they usually went out in the morning and returned in the early afternoon. But this time, the mother had to take an important phone call, and they only managed to leave the house around noon. Third, when the little boy insisted he wasn't feeling well, swore that they weren't alone, and promised that he had spotted a weird animal in the bushes, his sister and his mother assumed it was just more of his overactive imagination and nothing serious. But very soon, everything would turn deadly serious for the sweet and naive family of 3. So the family started their walk up a hill and through the trees a little too late. They settled at their usual spot for a picnic, and they took a little more time than usual. The mother relaxed and let her children enjoy their afternoon, but it was difficult to keep track of time when they were having so much fun. She didn't realize in time that they couldn't stay as long up the hill as they usually did. The sun was starting to come down. By the time she realized it, she knew she had to descend down the hiking path quickly, which was never easy when walking with two small children that got distracted easily. What she wasn't counting on was the fact that her son's distractions that day could be deadly. Only 5 minutes after they started their journey back home, everything started to get out of control. First, the mother realized her son was holding something very strange in his hand. She stopped him and checked his little hand, but she was immediately disgusted and upset. Her little boy had been holding what looked like a full strand of pitch-black hair. She quickly threw it on the ground and tried to clean her little boy's hand, ignoring the worrying words coming from her daughter. Little children could be cruel, and the girl was clearly trying to scare her brother as she said, "Mum, that hair is too long. Mum, that's not from an animal. Mum, I think he stole that from a person. Mum, I think someone gave him a chunk of hair. Mum, do you hear that?" Because the mother was too busy trying to get them back home and discouraging her son from picking up strange things from the ground, she didn't hear her daughter's question in time. Before the girl could repeat the question, before the mother could have any kind of warning, she started to hear it too. At first, it was so quiet and strange it could have passed as the sound of the wind through the treetops. But soon enough, it turned unmistakable. It was the sound of a man laughing. And it wasn't just any laugh. It was guttural, wet, interrupted by coughing fits as if someone tried to laugh while choking on their own blood. The sound was horrifying, but that wasn't the last of it. The small family was petrified for a second, and then they heard the rest. Along with that laughter, they clearly heard a masculine voice whisper, "Here, here." Every member of the family was ready to run. Problem was that one of them ran in the wrong direction. The little boy started following the voice, started following those whispers. The mother screamed and ran after him, and the daughter yelled and ran after her brother. It was all starting to feel like a terrible trap. The mother hadn't yet considered something supernatural. She knew that she was easy prey alone on the hill with her two children as the sun went down. But when she found her little boy, her perception of danger just reached unmeasurable levels. She found her son and immediately picked him up, at the same time that her daughter found them and clutched her mother's waist with her tiny arms. They were off the path and alone and scared. And through the shadows, beyond the bushes, the mother spotted their hunter. It wasn't a man at all. It was a lone and oddly white wolf, and the scariest creature she had ever seen. The mother knew that if the wolf decided to attack, they didn't stand a chance. She also knew there weren't supposed to be wolves in that area. It should have been impossible. She stood very still and closed her eyes, covered her daughter's eyes, and pressed her son's face to her shoulder where he couldn't see anything. She remembered the wolf's huge size and muscle and dirty white fur. But she didn't want to risk seeing the angry yellow eyes or the beast's teeth. She breathed deeply, tried not to show her fear, tried to be strong for her family. And, for all she knows, that could have been the thing that saved them. After a few excruciating seconds, the family heard that disgusting and evil laugh once again. It had come from a man, the mother thought. It couldn't be a wolf. Still, after the laughter, she heard footsteps shuffling away from them, and the laughter quieted in the distance. Only then did she dare to open her eyes. There was no man. There was no wolf. The woman still thinks she saw a small pile of long black hair on the ground between them and the wolf's location, but she'd rather not think too hard about it. She was content not knowing the truth and simply appreciating the fact that her family lived to see another day without knowing the evil, witchcraft, crimes against humanity and nature, and about whatever was hiding inside the unexplainable wolf she saw that night. Before I move on to the next story, I just want to say thank you for choosing to watch this video, and I hope you're enjoying my narration. If you feel like I'm worthy of a hit to that like button and your subscription to my channel, it would be hugely appreciated. Also, if you want to support my mission to become a full-time storyteller, please check out the link in the video description to an audiobook I narrated on Audible. You can get it for free by signing up for Audible's 30-day free trial, and you'll be really helping me out. If you love horror, you'll love this novel. Story 4. There is a common misconception about there being safety in numbers. Sometimes, a bigger number of people is only a more attractive prey. Sometimes the monsters that lurk in the shadows want a feast instead of a quick snack. Sometimes they want the victims to put up a fight. There are certain kinds of evil out there that aren't deterred by large groups or reinforcements. In fact, there are times when having friends around you could put you at a disadvantage, and could make you more sensible and vulnerable, because you care about the people surrounding you. When facing evil beyond comprehension, having a good friend doesn't necessarily help you. Fortunately, even in worst-case scenarios, sometimes there will be survivors out there ready to share the stories of their collective pain. These people know that their stories won't be enough to bring their friends back, but they are generous enough to make an attempt at spreading a warning, hoping against all odds that they could be the last victims to the terrors that we are about to relive. In this case, the survivors are part of a group of friends whose lives will be chained forever after one fateful camping trip. This story was told by a pair of brothers that were part of the original group. The brothers, along with at least half a dozen other young adults, made a trip into a section of a nearby national park, where people were allowed to go camping. It was the perfect spot, and for most of the trip, they seemed to be having a good time. On the way to the selected spot, the group had fun, took plenty of pictures, admired the diverse wildlife around them, and enjoyed the scenery as much as another's company. But at night, things started to change pretty quickly. Everything started with one of the women pointing out that she could hear an owl nearby. So she strayed away from the camp to try and search for it, and her friends let her. However, she was taking too long. Everyone noticed her absence, and although they weren't exactly worried yet, they wanted everyone together. So they went searching for her. The group found her standing very still in the middle of a clearing in the woods. She wasn't even taking pictures or videos or anything. She was only staring at a seemingly random spot in the trees. When they called her name, she didn't even hear them. She didn't move a muscle. It wasn't until one of them put a hand on her shoulder that the woman reacted. She was startled, and she looked a little pale, but other than that, she was perfectly normal. Or so they believed. Even though nobody saw the owl she was supposedly watching. That night, after good drinks and good food, everyone went to bed in their tents with a smile on their faces. Unfortunately, their peaceful slumber was interrupted by a voice. Their friend was calling, one by one, name by name, urging them to get out of their tents. Some of them were excited about a midnight adventure, while some others were annoyed by the disturbance in the middle of the night. But every single one of them turned out to be thoroughly shocked when they came out of their tents, and their friend was nowhere to be seen. They could have sworn she was right there, whispering their names close to their ears while they slept. And now, she was completely missing. Apparently, everyone reacted differently. Some disregarded it as a bad joke. Some were convinced she was just trying to get them to look for the stupid white owl she hadn't shut up about. And some people started to get really worried about her. The night was very dark and cold. She could get lost with incredible ease. After some arguing, the group of friends decided to go out and look for her. The pair of brothers, along with another guy, randomly selected to stay at the camp to keep the fire burning and welcome anyone that might return. They briefly complained about getting the most boring job. They had no idea this was about to be the thing that saved their lives. They sat down and waited patiently at first, and they quickly grew restless as time went on. The shadows appeared to darken, the temperature dropped, and every time the wind blew it sounded like one of their friends asking for help. But nothing could compare to the moment when one of them finally heard the owl. It happened all at once. They heard the cry of an owl nearby, and their friend stood up swiftly. He started walking towards the edge of the woods, and while the younger brother tried to chase him and get him to return to camp or at least explain what he was doing, the only answer he received from the guy, like a sleepwalker in a movie, was, "It's fine. I saw her face. I just saw her face. I found her." That's when the older brother stopped his sibling from running off into the woods too. The younger brother protested, determined to help his friends, but his sibling was insistent. While the younger one put up a fight and exclaimed, "Why? Why can't I help?" His older brother finally lost his patience, grabbed him by the shoulder, and with deadly seriousness he said, "Because I don't think it was our friend. Not anymore, at least." His ominous words were enough to shock his brother into listening. So the oldest took the opportunity to show him his most recent find. Inside one of the tents where their missing friend was supposed to sleep, there was a trail of very long and dark hair going from her pillow to the outside of the tent. Not only does no one in their group have hair that long, but in that tent were sleeping two blonde women. This was unsettling, unexplainable, and a good enough reason to lose calm. Before the brothers could come to an agreement on following their friend, staying put, or running for their lives, someone else returned to the camping site at full speed, screaming and bleeding. 3 of their friends came back, all looking scared out of their minds and in several states of dishevelment. One of them, though, was severely bleeding from a wound on his face. They quickly explained that they followed what they believed was a trail of bare human footprints. Then, they were paralyzed in fear when they believed they heard the growl of a dangerous animal, probably a wolf. To their utter surprise, when they attempted to retrace their steps, they ended up getting attacked by the same white owl that started this mess. Or so they thought. Owl or not, the creature did harm one of them, and he would need medical attention immediately. The group of friends, scared and helpless, had no option but to hastily pack their most essential belongings and leave as fast as they possibly could. The following hours were the worst of all their lives. Their wounded friend ended up losing his left eye. A search party discovered 2 lifeless bodies in the woods. Their friends had been mauled to death by a wild and unidentifiable animal. Their friend, the girl that tried to study the mysterious white owl, she was never found. That night, that group of friends experienced things they could not explain or understand. The only thing left was relief, guilt, and a vague feeling that they escaped something much bigger than a few angry wild animals. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I know there is a ton of content out there, and I'm sincerely appreciative for you watching this right through to the end. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit the like button, and if you don't already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and select the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my future uploads. Also, please leave a comment on this video letting me know what you thought of it. Comments really help with the YouTube algorithm and will really help my channel to grow. You can also let me know what type of videos you would like to see more of on this channel. That really helps me branch out into new subject matters. If you have a story you would like me to tell on this channel, please email it to me at stories@daredevril.com. If you want to support my channel even further, there are a number of ways you can do so. You can buy me a coffee via my Ko-fi account, or simply help me out by sharing my content with anyone you might think is interested in watching it. Thanks again.